Titanic's distress signal frantically echoed over Marconi wireless telegraphs across the North Atlantic. More than 9 hours away, an experienced ocean liner perked up, springing into action. Despite the fact that she was too far to be of help, she turned toward the disaster anyway, offering her support and rushing to the aid of the ill-fated Titanic. Welcome to Shipwreck Sunday. My name is Eleanor. Just a quick disclaimer for a younger audience before we dive in. This story may be disturbing to some, so viewer discretion is advised. Okay everyone, let's get into it. As we know, the White Star Line adjusted their policy to prioritize comfort, luxury, and better passenger capacity over speed in the late 1890s. So that is how the Big Four came about. RMS Baltic is the third ship in this class, being laid down in 1902 as hull number 352 at Harland & Wolff's Belfast shipyard. She was named after the Baltic Sea and would be the second ship to bear this name for the White Star Line, the first being of the Oceanic class in the 1870s, which was the first class of ships for the White Star Line following Thomas Ismay's purchase of the line. Baltic was originally planned to be just as big as Celtic and Seadric. However, the company quickly decided that Baltic was to be the largest ship ever built, requiring enlargement of the ship. This wasn't easy as this decision was made after the hull was already built, so she was cut in two and the rear was set back another 20 feet to make room for the addition. Ultimately, her tonnage increased by 3,000 metric tons, giving more space to her passengers. Before we get too excited, let's get into her specs. RMS Baltic was a bigger version of Celtic and Seadric, being the largest ocean liner in the world when she was launched, with a gross tonnage of 23,876 gross register tons and a net tonnage of 15,295 net register tons. She was 729 feet long, had a beam of 75 feet 6 inches wide, and a draft of 52 feet 6 inches deep. She was painted in typical White Star Line colors, with her red keel, black hull, white superstructure, and two buff and black tipped funnels. She too had 4 masts, the first carrying the lookout's nest and the rest serving as support for the cables of wireless telegraphy. She had 4 continuous decks as well as an upper deck and several superstructures. She was registered in Liverpool, and her typical route ran from Liverpool to New York City alongside her 2 older sisters. Now, let's look at propulsion. She had 2 4-cylinder quadruple expansion steam engines capable of producing 14,000 horsepower initially and 16,000 horsepower after a refit, which gave the ship her average service speed of 16 knots, though she could reach a maximum speed of 18 knots. Her coal consumption was slightly higher than that of Celtic or Seadric at 280 tons per day instead of 260. She was supplied with electricity and had electric lights and refrigeration installations. As for her swank interiors and passenger amenities, her facilities were similar to that of her 2 older sisters. She had a grand first-class dining room adorned with a glass roof, a smoking room decorated with beautiful stained glass, a lounge with reading and writing rooms, a veranda cafe, and a sheltered promenade deck for strolling without getting blasted by sea spray. Her second-class facilities were also far more spacious than that of competitors at the time, thanks to that last-minute enlargement. As for passenger capacity, at launch, she could carry 2,875 passengers, breaking down into 3 classes: 425 first class, 450 second class, and 2,000 third class, which also marked a change, with the upper classes having a greater capacity than on the Celtic and the Seadric, while the third class had a reduced capacity. In 1921, following World War I, Baltic was refit, and her third-class capacity was reduced to 1,166. In 1927, like her sisters, she was refit again, and she could carry 393 cabin-class passengers, 339 tourist class, and 1,150 third class. The ship at any time averaged a crew of 560. Baltic was a new and improved luxury on the sea. And she'd go on to save countless lives. If you're enjoying this video, leave me a like, subscribe to the channel for more content, and let me know down in the comments section below. Okay, let's get into her career. RMS Baltic was launched on November 21st, 1903, and it was reported by the Illustrated London Times that she was christened by actress Julia Nielsen. She was completed on June 23, 1904, and she reached Liverpool for delivery. Her maiden voyage would commence just 6 days later on June 29, 1904. Her first captain was Captain E.J. Smith, and if that name sounds familiar, it should. That's the captain of RMS Titanic who valiantly went down with the ship. She arrived in New York City on July 8, 1904, with 906 passengers on board, breaking down into 209 first, 142 second, and 555 third class. It took her 7 days, 13 hours, and 37 minutes for her to cross the Atlantic at an average speed of 16.1 knots, burning 235 tons of coal per day. Though it was a great triumph that she was the largest ship ever built, the modifications to her structure during her design posed a problem. She needed more power to get her across the sea in time for regular crossings. She'd get an upgrade to help with this problem. Baltic remained on the Liverpool to New York City route for the following years, proving ever popular with the customers and more so than her fellow liners, thanks to her spacious interiors. However, like her two older sisters, her early career was plagued with incidents. In May of 1905, she was held back for 6 hours by a breakdown of machinery. More serious, on November 3, 1906, a fire broke out in one of her holds, and though it was eventually under control, the fire and water to put it out destroyed more than 600 bales of cotton. On April 13, 1907, she collided with and sank a barge loaded with coal in the middle of New York Harbor, and in August of 1908, yet another fire broke out in her holds during a stopover in New York, causing $10,000 in damage, which would be $349,418 in 2025 thanks to inflation. On June 30th, 1910, she collided with the tanker Standard of the German-American Petroleum Company. This collision tore the hull of the Baltic above and below the waterline, and one compartment flooded, while a severely injured sailor from the tanker was transferred aboard the liner by boat to be operated on there. From 1907 onward, the Baltic provided a secondary service from Liverpool on Thursdays, in addition to the main service from Southampton alongside Celtic, Cedric, and Arabic, another White Star liner. The first time Baltic would come to the rescue was early in 1909. On January 23, 1909, the White Star liner RMS Republic was steaming in fog off Nantucket when she was rammed by the Italian ship SS Florida and was severely damaged in the collision. Her radio operator, Jack Binns, hastened to telegraph a CQD, a distress signal used at the time, and this was the first time it had ever happened. Baltic picked up the signal around 6 in the morning, and the ship, now captained by J.B. Ranson, was traveling westbound 64 miles from the collision when they turned around to come to Republic's aid. Due to the thick fog, Baltic quite literally zigzagged for 200 miles to find Republic, and she eventually found her at 7 p.m. The Florida was in rough shape, so all of Republic's passengers that had been transferred to her were transferred to Baltic. Republic would sink the following day around 8 p.m., and only 5 were lost in the incident. This was the first time wireless telegraphy had played a huge role in saving lives at sea, and it was also useful for spreading the news. Baltic and Republic survivors were greeted by a large crowd upon arriving in New York City. The passengers of Baltic decided to contribute to offering commemorative medals to the 3 captains of Republic, Florida, and Baltic for a calm, cool, and collected rescue, as well as to Republic's wireless operator Jack Binns. On the ill-fated night of April 14, 1912, Baltic sent the following warning to RMS Titanic regarding ice, quote, Greek steamer Athenia reports passing icebergs and large quantities of field ice today in latitude 41 degrees 51 minutes north, longitude 49 degrees 52 minutes west. Wish you and Titanic all success, Commander. Unfortunately, as we know, Titanic and her crew did not heed Baltic's warning or the warnings of the Californian, and so she struck an iceberg and sank at 2:20 a.m. on April 15, 1912. The Baltic did receive Titanic's SOS distress signal via Cunard's Caronia, and they diverted 9 hours to try to come to her rescue. She was, however, too far away to be of any help, and Carpathia instead was the ship that would save the survivors of the sinking Titanic. Of course, like all other ships of the White Star Line, Baltic received more lifeboats after the loss of Titanic. World War I began on July 28, 1914, and during this beginning portion of time, RMS Baltic and the Adriatic continued to serve the Liverpool to New York City route. She and Adriatic were joined by the Lapland, Zealand, and Vaterland of the Red Star Line, the latter two quickly being renamed to Northland and Southland thanks to the ick that German names were giving everybody, and they provided the only transatlantic service of the company at the time. During this time, Numerous other ships were being requisitioned for the war effort, starting with Celtic and Shipwreck, which were converted to auxiliary cruisers. During the service, Baltic unfortunately collided with the steamship Kamal at the exit of the Ambrose Channel on November 19, 1914. From 1915, the Baltic was also requisitioned, but to serve as a troopship under the liner requisition scheme, since it was found that this was better suited for ocean liners than to be auxiliary cruisers. On April 26, 1917, she was attacked by the German submarine U-66, which tried and failed to torpedo her, and the U-boat engaged in a 2-day pursuit of her, from which Baltic emerged unscathed. Baltic was also the ship that delivered Major General John J. Pershing and his staff to England. In reference to this momentous event, a commemorative plaque was then installed in the main hall of the ship. During her wartime service, she also carried large quantities of oil in her bunkers and double bottom for the war effort. During the first 10 months of 1918, she brought 32,000 Canadian soldiers to France. Finally, she ceased her military service on December 12, 1918 to return to civilian service. She'd served well in World War I, and she'd continue to be a bro on the seas until the end of her career. Thank you so much to our amazing YouTube members and patrons. If you'd like to have some awesome perks like episodes a full day in advance, join our YouTube memberships today. Alright, let's get into the end of her career. At the end of 1918, Baltic was back on the Liverpool to New York City route, undergoing a refit in 1921. The number of migrants crossing the Atlantic was far less after World War I than it was before, and thanks to the US passing new legislation in the 1920s, the number of migrants allowed into the country was greatly reduced, which would negatively impact ocean liners overall. The capacity of Baltic's third class fell from 1,800 to 1,166, and in 1922, Adriatic returned to the route, reuniting the Big Four on the slow, secondary service of the White Star Line. Every 2 weeks, the liners made an additional stopover in Boston. Then 3-year-old Isaac Asimov and his family immigrated to the United States via Liverpool on the Baltic, arriving on February 3, 1923. In 1924, her boilers were replaced by newer models. Thanks to being an aging and slow ocean liner, in 1927, Baltic was modernized and converted to a cabin-class ship, which is what we would start to see more often as we moved forward into the 1930s and 40s. The ship also began to offer more modest rates, and her sister ships underwent the same refit the next year. In the case of the Celtic, her service was short-lived as she grounded off Queenstown, Ireland at the end of 1928. On December 6, 1929, the Baltic came to the rescue of the sinking schooner Northern Light. The next month, she experienced an incident when a wave knocked her against a dock in Liverpool, damaging one of her propellers. It would take divers 9 hours to repair this. The Baltic became a regular at the newly created Canadian immigrant terminal Pier 21 when it opened in 1928, and she made 18 voyages here. The Great Depression hit in 1929 and would absolutely annihilate the economy in the 1930s. Many shipping lines, including the White Star Line, suffered from a period of internal crisis due to the Great Depression. In 1930, a new ship joined the company's fleet, MV Titanic, and she quickly became successful. The older ships were far less successful, and the Shipwreck was therefore scrapped at the end of 1931. The arrival of MV Georgic, the last ship built for the White Star Line, in 1932 sealed Baltic's fate, and she made her final crossing on September 17, 1932. After this, she was sold to Japanese shipbreakers in Osaka, Japan in early 1933, along with the Megantic for £33,000, and she left Liverpool for Osaka on February 17, 1933, under the command of Captain Corfe, later being scrapped. And with that, the Bro of the Seas was gone. The youngest of 4 sisters hit the seas only to be immediately embarrassed. She was meant to be the largest in the world, only to be overshadowed by the illustrious Lusitania, a ship whose name remains timeless and infamous to this day. Despite her incredible career and amenities, she'd never gain the recognition destined for her. On next week's episode of Shipwreck Sunday, we get into the final ship of the Big Four, RMS Adriatic.